Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for attending today's webinar, which is all about Microsoft SharePoint. It's an introduction. So this is a webinar that is geared for beginners or people who want to pack in the foundation a little bit more because there are always new features and updates and cool things you can do. So it's a good webinar for everyone. We're going to start from the beginning, show you around SharePoint a little bit, Microsoft SharePoint, an introduction. So my name is John, and I'm excited to talk about SharePoint, something I use every single day in some way, shape, or form. I bet you do too if you use Microsoft 365. But let's explore some of the things we can do with SharePoint, and again, maybe some ways that you're using it that you're not aware of. Sometimes SharePoint used to be one of those words we didn't want to use because it was kind of scary, but it's not that scary. It's so well integrated with the things we want to do, whether we're working in Outlook or we're working in Teams. So we're going to go into what Microsoft SharePoint is. And really today we're talking about Microsoft 365 and the SharePoint Online version. So we're going to give a definition and talk about purpose and talk about the different types of SharePoint sites that exist. Because if you're a person who's simply interacting and engaging somehow with a SharePoint site, like in your browser, it could be a communication site, it could be a team site, it could be a Teams connected SharePoint team site. And we use the word team a lot in these. So some of the benefits of using SharePoint, just along the way, talk about reasons why, because we've got a practice environment, which I'll show you, and I'll demo some real world examples and workflows and just kind of show you how things are put together and give you an idea of how they're connected. And just some of the other cool features and some of the essential features like libraries, lists, web parts, and other things that I'll show. Team collaboration, it's an awesome place to collaborate. That's what it's built for in many ways, especially if it's a team site. And again, with the word team, integration with Microsoft Teams, the app. We'll talk about sharing permissions, how that works. And again, you don't have to necessarily be a SharePoint person, somebody who's taken a week-long class to learn all about SharePoint 2010. This is much more intuitive. The look and feel is pretty consistent throughout the whole Microsoft 365 ecosystem. So I think you're going to find it pretty easy. Co-authoring, version history, more like search and stuff. Also some of the document management, just showing that, how you can basically do things like your version control. You can roll back to previous versions. You can revoke permissions and monitor that. Tons of insights are built in, so you can learn about how people are looking at that library, even what time of day and how many documents they consume. Integration with the other apps. What I'm going to do, since we only have about 30 minutes, and I could talk about this for days, examples of SharePoint integration with some of the apps like Teams, because not everybody, certainly who's listening or watching, is using Teams. Some people aren't even using Microsoft. They're maybe going to switch from Google to a SharePoint Microsoft environment. So it's good to just understand which apps are available. There are several, even third-party ones, but mainly I'm noticing people are using Teams, things like OneNote, certainly your OneDrive, and then other apps like Planner. There are approvals. There are tons of workflow things that we can do. And then, of course, where do I put that file? And then now, how do I find it? Sometimes you place a file somewhere. Was it my OneDrive? Was it SharePoint? Was it Teams? Because if you share files in Teams, it could be OneDrive or SharePoint. It depends. So let's briefly, what's the difference? We're talking about SharePoint today, but OneDrive is everywhere. OneDrive for Business is what we're talking about. That's part of the subscription you have for work or for school, whatever your license might be for it. So it's an online cloud from Microsoft for personal files, your personal work files. So think of it like My Documents in the cloud, that little folder on your computer. Now it's on OneDrive. Think of it like that. So these files are all private, like they were on your computer. And you've got a password to get in. They're private until you choose to share them. Then you can share files individually that are yours on your OneDrive, or you can share whole folders, and you can also put shortcuts in there so you can reach out to other places. It's pretty cool. We also use OneDrive a lot of times for drafting things, because then You can have something you're working on, let's say a newsletter or a blog or a write-up report. Start it in OneDrive, and then you can eventually move it to SharePoint, and we'll talk about how you can do that. It is accessible from anywhere. I'd recommend downloading the Microsoft 365 app, honestly. There are separate apps for pretty much each of the Microsoft 365 apps, larger apps. So check them out. I use them, but I mainly use that Microsoft 365 app because it can connect everything else. So this is really good for collaborating, even though it's a personal storage place. Again, good for drafts. We have the same content collaboration across the Microsoft 365 services like security and stuff. So that's good. You can create different types of links. So you can share differently with different people, internal or external. You can even create anonymous links. So there are a lot of things you can do with OneDrive. But remember, they're managed by you or us, the individuals. And SharePoint, we'll talk about that in just a sec, is more for the group. That's managed by the organization. So it could be a few owners and then various people maybe. OneDrive files can easily be copied or moved to SharePoint later. So if you put something in OneDrive and you're thinking, oh, I should have put that in the SharePoint folder, you can just click a button, move or copy. And since it's in the Microsoft cloud already, it just moves over. It's really, really easy. So SharePoint, that's what we're talking about today. This is more collaborative. This is, instead of my files, this is going to be our team files. It's a good place to store and update. And of course, publish. Sometimes it's the way to put information out there. People are going to read it, or as I like to say, consume it. Co-authoring, collaboration with your colleagues. Again, it's a great place to drop a file into a shared folder by the group. People can work on it or view it or whatever. And then you don't have to worry. If people leave the organization or leave the department, they're going to leave the group. So therefore, they leave the permissions. So you don't have to worry about it. If they're in, it's automatic. And the same thing works in Teams. So those permissions are granted on a site basis. So again, OneDrive, that's all your stuff. The permissions are a little different site by site, and we can adjust those. Also, sometimes you may know SharePoint as just a portal to get to your stuff at work. So it does enable for an intranet style. I think it's like a website for work, and we can do a lot of fancy things with it, like have shared calendars and do task lists, planner, have news pages, things like that. So it's when that question is, where do I find that information? Where do I find that file? A lot of times the answer is SharePoint. And anything you have in SharePoint is accessible through OneDrive and accessible through Teams. So you shouldn't have any problem really finding something. Sometimes you just may not know where to look. So the search features is pretty amazing. And the permissions are going to work across all of the Microsoft 365 stuff, including SharePoint. So if we use Teams, that kind of brings it all together. I think of it like this purple viewfinder, this cloud that lays on top. It kind of brings everything together when you have interaction. This is a place where you're chatting about the work, posting about it, having meetings about different things, using apps and connecting them. There's so many things you can do. So Teams becomes that one place, that work OS that you're spending a lot of time in potentially. Because if you set it up a certain way, Teams and SharePoint, and create your workflow around that, this is where the work is happening. We still have the security of SharePoint because you have to have SharePoint to have Teams. That's a requirement. Any team you have in Teams has a SharePoint site, and you can interact with either one and the same files they're synced. So this is a way that we can be flexible. We can still be unified as a group. And by the way, just a side note, if you are a Teams person, any of the channels you have in Teams, those are all in the main site library on SharePoint, and each channel is a subfolder. So that's another thing that makes it easy. It's all set up, the structure. Channels are subfolders of that larger team, or topic. Could be a department, a project. And all of this, we're going to do some demo, but I just wanted to point out all of this is based on this Microsoft 365 group, which is a newer type of group in Microsoft. You might have heard of like distribution lists, security group, Active Directory. So Azure Active Directory, the name's changed to Microsoft Entra ID, but that powers everything. It's security. It's like the backstage pass. We get access to multiple things based on when we're authenticated. So if we're in a Microsoft 365 group, we get all the SharePoint stuff. And additionally, we get apps like Stream and Planner, Outlook. You can use Power BI with it and connect. That's all part of that group. And then we have this team site. So with the team site, we get all the other things like OneNote and Forms, which I'm going to show you in just a moment we're going to do a little poll. And then access to all sorts of other apps. And Teams is one of those apps. So that means all of that is connected to Teams in the same instance, like the same, like human resources. So it's just important to make sure that you're not using a team that's called human resources and then a SharePoint site that's called HR. That's probably redundant, and you just want to make sure things are set up right. So briefly, SharePoint's a tool. Think of it as creating websites or publishing content, storing your files at work. We talked about the Teams connected ones. There are really three main types of SharePoint sites. Team sites, the collaborative ones, the ones that I get all excited about because then we're working on building the documents and sharing. Then there are communication sites. That might be more like your intranet. That's where you're reading about events, different projects that are happening. Sometimes it's a read-only, and you don't have a team associated with a communication site. The Teams connected SharePoint team sites, they have to be connected. So either your IT team does that or the owner. So again, Teams being that collaboration tool, is that place where we can invite other people to collaborate. We can have different types of channels. And as I mentioned, each team is connected to SharePoint. So think of it like this. Each of, like, marketing team, for example, has a site. Employee onboarding has a site. Information services, SharePoint sites. So these actually are pretty nice looking, easy to use now. They used to be a little bit harder and just very plain. This is the modern interface. They're calling it the modern experience. So how do you use SharePoint? There are lots of ways, as you could see just from that. How many different ways? Give this a try. So a lot of people are using it in Teams, and maybe you didn't realize you were using it in Teams before. Sometimes people don't, thinking Teams and SharePoint are completely separate. But again, you've got to have SharePoint to have Teams. Just having a little bit of background on that is helpful. So here we go. Most people are using it, it looks like, for Teams, document management, sharing, collaboration. And then a few people don't use SharePoint. I love it. 10%. I love that icon or that emoji. And then intranet and employee portals. Interesting. Cool. Yeah, I think it seems pretty common. Most people are using it for documents. Now, there are other ways. We'll leave that area. There are other ways you can use SharePoint. So hopefully we can expose some of those, make you aware, and give you some ideas of how you can maybe use some other apps or connect apps that you're using that you don't realize can be displayed so easily with a web part, for example. So here I'm starting, and by the way, feel free to launch Microsoft365.com for yourself. And if you have that environment available, I'm going to click on the app launcher. I'm just going to go to SharePoint. So this is the main SharePoint landing page on the web. I'm using Edge here, but you can use Chrome. Works about the same as Edge capabilities wise. If you use like Safari or Brave, it works, but not as well sometimes. But here we go. We can see just a quick tour of what this looks like, an introduction. This is how you can create a site. You can just click that button, create site. Now, by default, anyone can do this. Keep in mind that your organization likely has some sort of governance that you're supposed to follow. That means there are rules. Maybe you have to submit a request, some sort of a ticket, or maybe you're allowed to just go create them. Sometimes that's even removed on some organizations. You won't even see the create site button. So I just want to let you know, if you click that, you could create your own SharePoint site. It's possible. So here are the two main types, team site and communication site. Remember, this is more for your team to have a private space versus OneDrive, which is for you, the individual, to have a space. And then communication site, that's the portal. I think intranet. website, just a few owners and lots of visitors, probably read-only. So if I create a team site, there are lots of templates that you can use from Microsoft, and your organization can even create special templates that have your company colors and designs and fonts and stuff. But from Microsoft, there are some good ones. Standard, that's very basic, just blank slate basically. And we have things like employee onboarding. Maybe there's a big event this summer. You could create a SharePoint site and have a team with channels about it for coordination. Help desk, project management. This builds in some tools and some apps that are helpful for project management, like Planner and like some web parts that show that off. I'll show you an example of that. Retail management. As you can see, there are a few that are helpful to get started. And even if it's not the thing on the title that you're using, sometimes it can still be a good layout and give you ideas. I'm going to close that though. We're not going to create one. We're going to check out an existing one. Here, also create news post. This is something that people do. Think of it as a modern newsletter instead of the mailboxes full of paper copies and a bunch of them are in the recycle bin. This is a digital version. You can post news, anybody can. But again, follow the governance and rules of your organization. We've got following, recent, and save for later. Frequent sites. Sometimes you have to make sure you click the star and follow a site that's important to you. That's definitely a good thing to do. I'm going to go to the Mark 8 project team. And this is an example of a Teams connected SharePoint team site. There's the company logo, it says SharePoint, and there's the name. Now you can see the little Teams icon right there. That means I could go to the team, go to that channel, and just by clicking there. Not all SharePoint sites have that. If it does, that means there's a team associated with it. But if not, there has not been one associated yet, or it's a communication site. We can see this one is public. This means public, anybody in the organization, not anybody in the world. And it has 19 members. You can see how easy it is to just look. You can see the content that's available. You can see the members and their status as far as, like, Dan's an owner. I'm a member of this group. So as a member, you're going to be able to do everything that I can unless it was turned off. I can even add additional members if I want to. That can all be changed by an owner, but out of the box, this is what it does. So here's an example of a web part. This is on the home page, the main area, which actually in this case is called Subject Matter Experts. This is the quick launch area, and this allows us to go see things like that shared Outlook calendar. It's going to launch that way. Or maybe the planner board. If you use apps like Microsoft Planner to connect tasks that you have, I use one for our webinar team. We have lots of completed tasks, some that are started. This is just an example for each of those. And here, actually, there is a web part which has Planner. And I'll show you how we can interact with those. OneNote, that's another app that's helpful. This one's been customized a little bit. So this gives us access to things, different notebooks that we might have from meetings or any other reason you might be using OneNote. It's a good app to use with SharePoint because then people can collaborate and have different pages and sections of their own and contribute. Let's go back to the project site. There it is. So there are lots of quick launch things on the side, but it's editable. We can also do things like create a new list or a new document library. Now, lists, think of those as like structured data repositories for like an Excel document or something. It's for organizing. You can store different demographics or bit of information about inventory or anything where you're managing things in a table. So it's a list. There are rows, columns, cells, and they're pretty powerful. And there's an app called Microsoft Lists, which is similar, but a little bit more user-friendly and still stored in SharePoint. So you have to check that out. Document libraries, those are repositories for your documents. A few hundred types of documents, so you can really put almost any type you have available on there. And there's lots of space. We can manage, store, interact with all the documents there in a document library. And you can create several of them and then change the permissions if you want. There's a lot you can do with those. And you can create other things within this project team site, like different pages. You may create a page that has a list of SOPs or some other procedures, maybe MSDS type stuff. It's just pages where you can have knowledge sharing or links. And you can also put web parts on there and share those, just that page if you want to. So it is structured in a hierarchy, and there are different parts or site assets. And the assets are libraries, lists, links, files, things like that. Now, when we see new plan, that means a new planner plan. And we can use an existing plan that we have, or we can create something new. Like we've got this Mark8 project. I could create a planner, and I could call this one a logo for, I'm just going to put in device. And then do I want to show that in this quick launch site navigation or not? I say no. This is just an example. Actually, I'm going to say yes. It'll be quicker to get to. So this created a planner board and a grid, and we can display our charts. This one's empty right now, but we can begin adding our tasks and assigning people and setting due dates. This is all incredibly helpful to use these for lightweight project management. So there's an app called Planner, and you can access this in Teams, and in SharePoint it's going to be the same one. These plans and Planner are associated with that site. So that's just another one of the capabilities, is creating that. So what I'm going to do now is going to click back here to that main area and show you an example of editing this page, which members can do. So just keep that in mind. Here's that project tracking planner plan. I'm clicking on this little pencil. These are web parts or containers that house pretty much any of our assets, and we can display them in these little containers of web parts. So I could pick a different plan if I wanted to, even create a new one even, or show the board. Oh, look, this is the project with all the assignments and different tasks. That's cool, because maybe, and I republish that, maybe when people come to this site, I want them to be able to see the planner plan. That way they don't have to go try to find the planner app, which is kind of hidden right now, and access it. It's all right here in that one spot. So the thing is, when we go to something like Teams, here's the Mark8 project team. There are several channels in here. We've got General, Design, Digital Assets, Web, Go-to-Market Plan, and Research and Development. Now those are all subfolders on SharePoint. So check this out. I'm going to click on the Design channel, and I'm going to go to Files. That's a tab. And if we do that, we're going to see all of the files that are associated with the Mark8 project team. And these are the same ones that are on SharePoint. This is a peek inside of SharePoint. It's cool to add the shortcut to your OneDrive. If you're in a document library on a SharePoint site or in Teams all the time, add a shortcut to your OneDrive, because then it's going to be there with all your other stuff. But I'm going to click here. Look, open in SharePoint. That's kind of the proof. Open in SharePoint is going to bring me to the same place. Look, here's a document library. The subfolders in the document library on SharePoint are the same as I'm so excited, I'm hitting the mic. The same as the channels in Teams. And actually they're segmented up here so that it's not as confusing, because you can put other things on your SharePoint site but not have them be channels necessarily. But they're still accessible. Yes, so you can create unique document libraries. The main one, there's always a main one called Documents. But yeah, you can absolutely check out other things within there. Now, permissions-wise in SharePoint, if I wanted to take this, and I'm going to just choose Share. Sharing is one of those things that you don't always have to do in SharePoint. Sometimes it's like re-sharing to somebody else on the team and they don't know where the document is. Because you can share it with somebody external, like I'm going to share with myself. This is within the practice environment, but I'm going to put in my email for work, and it's going to just remind me that JHood is outside your organization. So it will let you share with people. I'm going to click on the gear. We can't create an anonymous link like we can in SharePoint, but we can share with everybody in the organization. We can reshare, this is what I was talking about, people with existing access, and apply that. Yep. And then the other one is people you choose. And this is a really common one because you can say, well, people can view it, they can edit it, or you can really ratchet down the permissions and say they can't even download it. And you can apply that and then pick those people. Maybe me externally, I can send that. And now me as an external person has permission to that file. And anytime you want to revoke those permissions, by the way, if you click on the three dots and you go to manage access, this is one of the ways that you can manage access to the files in the library. People individually, look external, he can't download. Different groups and different permissions in there, and then links, because I created a special link, a unique link. And we can always copy, paste those wherever we need to. This is a quick overview. Of course, there's so much more with the permissions and what you want to do with things. There was one cool feature I did mention, which is the copy or move. I'm going to just check this folder and I'm going to do copy to. And let's say we wanted to have a copy of that also in retail. I'm going to copy that there. It didn't remove it. It broke off an exact copy of it, and that is now on the retail SharePoint site in the document library. Pretty fancy. So if I wanted to search for retail, that's going to be the search on the top. Somebody's asking about that. A couple other questions. There's a lot, so thanks. I'm trying to work them in. I appreciate all your questions. I like the interaction. How do you create the list on the left side of your screen that shows a recycle bin? Your site does not show that list. Sometimes sites won't show that list if they are a communication site like this, and that's different than a team site. So that list on the side, that quick launch that you see in team sites, that's going to be pretty much the stuff up here on the top. And I'm guessing that's how your site is set up. That's a good question, though. That's one of the big visual differences between a team site and a communication site. And then when the word channel is said, what is to be understood? File, folder, something else? Whenever we say channel in Teams, it means that this is an example of a team, this project. Maybe I can zoom in a little bit. And then under that main topic, could be a department project, is everybody gets a general channel, but there are different channels that are in context to whatever is we're talking about. Like the design part of the project team is going to focus on this channel, and they can upload files and post. And then any of the files that you post or interact with are on this files tab, and that's the document library subfolder. So team and SharePoint site have the same title, and then subfolders in SharePoint are the same as channels in Teams. Like literally it's just in context to the retail team or whatever that might be. And then another question, can an external audience have access to SharePoint you create? Yes, they can. They can have limited access, and you can refine those. And there's a way, but I can't. Oh, about the thing on the side. Yep. Everything is pretty much customizable. So if you do have a communication site, it is possible to go in and make it look differently. And you can do that in the editing area. It's going to be slightly different. You can add different parts. So we've got tons of content about that too. Time's up. Again, I could keep going, but we've covered everything that I wanted to show you about the introduction. It's really just getting to know what's what, navigating a little bit. This is also part of a series, so we've got lots of other content that has to do with ways you can collaborate differently and better, and kind of take a look at that experience. Yeah, sometimes your workflow changes. Sometimes you can find a way to make it work very similarly. So it doesn't always have to be a tough switch if somebody's commenting for those switching from Google to this. All right, cool. I'm going to stick around. Thanks for attending. And we did have a lot of questions at the end there, so I went over a little bit to address those. But thanks, everyone. I appreciate your time and also learning something new or brushing up. All righty, we'll see you next time. Bye. Okay, good question. Somebody's asking, you have a SharePoint site, but it doesn't show up in your list when you go to SharePoint. How can I add it? My recommendation is when you go to the app launcher and you go to SharePoint, sometimes if there aren't many, you won't see it. So what I recommend is going up, and I'm going to type in retail as my example. Sometimes it'll show up in sites because when you search for anything, it's broken down differently now. So you can click on sites and usually find it there. So that might work. Give that a try. Yeah, sometimes if you just upgraded, you're not going to see anything there. I know it's kind of strange how it does that. But there's a search term. So I'm going to copy paste it. And it is a little workaround. It is content class, one word, /STS_site. If you do that, I'm going to paste this in the chat for you. If you do that, it is going to show every SharePoint site that you have permission to. That's a fun fact right there. I couldn't remember it off the top of my head, but content class, all one word and then a colon, and no space, /STS_site. All right. Yeah, that is a cool one. All right, everyone. Again, thanks so much. I'm looking forward to seeing you at the next one.